I want to give a huge shout out and a thank you to my sponsor, P2 Collectibles, located at 204 East McGalley Road in Muncie and on eBay as well. So next time you're here in Muncie, let us know. Come give us a visit. Hey, what is up, y'all? This is Alex from Plus3 TCG, and I'm coming at y'all with a how-to Weather Painter discussion. A while back when I made that Weather Painter deck, people were asking how to play the deck because for the most part, this deck isn't on anyone's radar. No one's really hyping up Weather Painters, except for when they initially came out, when snow spiked up and people saw that deck profile from France. I still don't even know if that's real or not. Anyways, the deck is pretty fun for the most part. It is a stun-oriented deck, kind of slow, but consistent nonetheless. It can search out a lot, and yeah, let's just hop right into it per request. This is How to Weather Painter. So there are 13 weather cards in total as of now. We're missing one, and that is the red. And we're also, I guess, missing a canvas for the Weather Painter Rainbow, which I don't think we're really going to get that, considering it is the boss monster. I don't know if boss monster necessarily deserves a support card in and of itself, but that's neither here nor there. There are 7 monsters. One of those being a link monster. The first one we're going to talk about is Sunny. If this card is in your graveyard, you can send one face-up continuous spell trap you control to the graveyard, special summon this card in defense position, and if you do, place the weather spell trap from your hand face-up in your spell and trap zone. You can only use this effect of the Weather Painter Sun once per turn. Once per turn, during the standby phase of the turn after this card was banished from the field to activate the weather card's effect, you can special summon this banished card. All of the Weather Painter cards have that last effect. The standby phase tag back in if you banish from the field to activate a weather card. They can all just special summon themselves back even after the turn, or the turn after they are activated. So all of them have that effect, so this will probably be the last time that I repeat that. But just in case, once returned during the standby phase of the turn after this card was banished from the field to activate the weather card's effect, you can special summon this banished card. They all say that. Last time I'm going to say it. This card isn't the best card. I think if you're going to play it in the pure version, you should play 2, but if you're not going to play pure, just play 1, because it does have its utility. It can summon itself onto the field, not for free, but at the cost of popping one of your spell or traps. And if you have a cloud, then it is pretty much for free, because you're just going to get that back, whatever you pop. But other than that, it's just kind of a cool extender. You can normal it and then use it for a rainbow link summon, but for the most part, this card isn't like the greatest extender. It's a very good late game extender, but other than that, I think you should play 1 or 2 of this. But the next card we're talking about is Snowy. This card is the good one. You want to see this turn 1 for sure. When this card is normal summon, you can place 1 weather spell trap from your deck face up in your spell and trap zone. You can only use this effect of the Weather Painter Snow once per turn. This one is great because it sets you up snowy or snow into snowy. That canvas is great, but we'll get to that later. And it has a lot of utility because as soon as you activate that snowy, you can just bounce out and add whatever you need, which is usually a thundery. Then we have Rain. If this card is special summon, you can place 1 the weather spell trap from your hand face up in your spell trap zone, and once again you can only use this effect once per turn. It's a hard once per turn, and the typical standby effect. This one I don't recommend playing because you have to keep cards in your hand. I guess that's relevant because if you play Anti-Spell Fragrance, which I think all of the versions should be playing it, the True Draco, Pure, and the Wind Witch version, all of which are decent, they all should be playing Anti-Spell Fragrance because all of the engines can utilize it very well. But with that up, you can activate the spells right off the bat, so this can potentially get them there. I still don't think it warrants a play at all in the main deck, so take that with a grain of salt. Then there's Cloud. I think this one is another one of the best in the deck because of another face-up. The weather card you control is sent to the grave. You can target up to 2 the weather spell traps in your graveyard. Place them face-up in your spell trap zone. That is insane because if you already have an established Thunder, you can search one out from the deck, essentially. Not search one out, but you can place one straight from deck to the field, and then after that resolves, Cloud's going to activate, and then put those 2, put one or another one in the grave back onto your field, essentially giving you a +1. Great card. The problem with that is they can clog, but as we'll talk about later, that is just one of the problems of the deck, is that it clogs quite a bit. Then we have Thunder. You can send one face-up continuous spell trap card you control to the graveyard. Place one, the weather spell trap from your deck, face-up in your spell trap zone. And once again, you can only use this effect of the Weather Painter Thunder once per turn. This is very relevant because it can set you up into whatever you don't have. And you notice it says you can send one face-up continuous spell trap. It doesn't say it has to be a weather. So if ASF is getting in your way, or if you play Valhalla, if that's getting in your way, you can send that and then activate something else and continue to go off from there. So this card is a definite 3 of. I think if you're playing anything less, you're not going to see it as much. And this card, while it's not a starter card, the likelihood of you seeing one of your spells, your continuous spells, to activate this card turn 1 is very likely. So you play 3. The next one is kind of user preference. It's either 1 or none. Aurora. When this card is normal summoned, you can place 1, the weather spell trap from your hand, deck, or graveyard, face up in your spell trap zone. Your opponent cannot target the weather spell traps you control with card effects. Also, they cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. That's all great and all, but it's a tribute summon monster. So this card is kind of hard to summon. You can search it and maybe like get it to go off turn. I mean, if you open Nutty, you can get this turn 2, and it does some extension, but I just don't think it warrants a spot in the main deck because you're not always opening ideally, and this card in an ideal hand is great, but in an unideal hand is terrible because it's just going to sit in your hand for 2 to 3 turns before you can summon it, and that is only if your opponent really didn't go off and establish a board. So I think it's good, but it doesn't warrant a spot in the main deck until we can normal summon this card a lot easier. The final painter card is the Weather Painter Rainbow. This is the boss monster of the deck, the Link. It takes 3 the weather monsters, and it has an attack of 2400, so it's the biggest one. Link 3, and its arrows are pointing to the bottom left, bottom, and the bottom right, which is pretty relevant because of what its effects are. When your opponent would special summon a monster, quick effect, you can send this Link summon card to the graveyard, negate the summon, and if you do, destroy that monster. Once per turn, during the standby phase of the turn, after this card was banished from the field to activate a weather card's effect, you can special summon this banished card. The weather effect monster this card points to gain the following effect. When a card or effect is activated, quick effect, you can banish this card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. The card is nuts. It's just really hard to summon because you have to have a couple turns to establish weather monsters that you can afford to get rid of, and then you have to have another monster that this card is pointing to, which takes a few turns. But when you can summon this, it's usually game because you usually will have at least 4 spell and traps taking up your back row, if not an anti-spell fragrance as well, to make that 5. And then you'll have this card plus another one, and then potentially another one coming back from the banish zone if you can somehow maintain to summon another one. The possibilities with this deck aren't endless, but if you can get this engine going, it's a pretty good deck. It's pretty fun to play. And the spells just really help you extend. Sunny, well, I say that and then I talk about Sunny. This one is okay. It's a 1 of at most, I would say. The weather effect, this is where the skill comes in because a lot of the spell and traps all of the spell and traps have this effect. The weather effect monsters in your main monster zones of this card's column and its adjacent columns gain this effect. So if it is right under it or in the adjacent columns, caddy corner, whatever you are familiar with, you can banish this card, then target one monster you control. Tribute that target, that's a quick effect. Tribute that target, and if you do, special summon 1, the weather monster from your hand or graveyard, but not with the same name the tributed monster had on the field. And you can only control 1, the weather sunny canvas. That's in all of them. You can't control more than one of the spells, so you can't control 2 Sunny or 2 Snowies. As you can see, this card takes a lot of setup. You need a card that you can afford to get rid of. Then you target a monster. You banish this card that the column is in, Sunny. Then you target a monster, tribute that target, and then special summon a weather monster from your hand or graveyard. So you're not really plussing in this situation. You're just trying to maintain board advantage, and you're trying to maintain that ability to stun, to have whatever monster you need in the column or adjacent column. And that's where the skill comes in with this deck. Moving on, we have Snowy, the Snowy canvas. The weather effect monster in your main monster zone of this card's column and its adjacent column gain this effect. You can banish this card, quick effect, add 1 weather card from your deck to your hand. Also, you cannot add cards from your deck to your hand for the rest of this turn except by drawing them. This card is very cool in the fact that all of them, you banish this cost. So with this, if they have like a Ragnarock or a Dark Hole to try to wipe out all of your monsters, if you have 3 on the board, and this card is in the adjacent column or the column directly under it, you can just banish all of them as cost, just add 1 weather card, and all of them are safe for next turn, effectively wasting their resource. They now have a chance to attack you, but we'll get into one of the texts later on and how tagging out and leaving an empty board isn't always the worst thing to happen to this deck. Moving on, we have the Rainy Canvas. The weather effect monsters in your main monster zone of this card's column and its adjacent column gain this effect. You can banish this card, then target 1 spell trap card your opponent controls, return it to the hand. This card is great because it allows you to really maintain that board advantage, because if you have an anti-spell fragrance, a lot of those cards that they're setting might be spells, so they're not chainable. So on their end phase, if you have 2 to 3 monsters, or even 1, you can just bounce one of those spell and traps back. On your standby phase, when it comes back, bounce another one of those back, and then if that's all they had, then you can effectively go off with your play. And if you have any more monsters on their end phase, bounce 2. On your standby phase, bounce whatever they have left, summon a monster, and then you get to go off with your plays essentially for free, unless they have hand traps, which this deck doesn't really die to hand traps, because when you Ghost Ogre or anything, I can just tag out. But when you Ash the Snow, or when you Ash the Snowy, that can be an issue. But that's really the only chance that you get to Ash besides my draw spells. The next one is Cloudy. The weather effect monsters in your main monster zone of this card's column and its adjacent columns gain this effect. You can banish this card, then target 1 face-up monster on the field, have its current attack for the rest of this turn, but it can attack directly this turn. This card is cool. Something I should probably go back and say is the ratio you should be playing some of the spells. Sunny, like I said, is a 1 of. Snowy is an immediate 3 of, because this card is a starter card when you have I guess not a starter card. It's a great extender when you have a Weather Painter in hand, because it gets you the stuff you need. Rainy is probably a 2 of because of its ability to spot remove. And then Cloudy is also a 2 of because it can allow you to save face, have their attack. They can attack directly, but we have a trap for that. If you're not guessing it already, we'll get to it later. So Cloudy, I think you should be playing 2 of. Just for the defensive moves. Then your last 2 cards are the traps, the Thundery Canvas. Not going to read the first part of the effects anymore, where the column and the adjacent thing are relevant. But at the start of the damage step, if this card battles an opponent's monster, you can banish this card, return that opponent's monster to the hand. This card is so relevant because this is how you clear boards. No matter how big their thing is, this doesn't target, it activates at the start of the damage step, so you can just bounce their stuff away and clear their boards. It's a very, very, very nice card. Unlike Auroral, which isn't the best card in the deck, and I don't think you should be playing any of these. I think you should be playing 2 to 3 of the Weather Thundery Canvas, but Auroral, don't play it. Now what Auroral does is when exactly 1 card is added to one player's hand, except during the damage step, you can banish this card, banish the added card, and if you do, that player draws 1 card. I don't really see the utility. I guess if they're adding an important card, you can banish it and then hope they just don't draw into something like an extender for you. when you add a card, I guess you can banish it and then draw one if it's not relevant. This can come up at times with the Weather Painters because this deck can brick. When you add the stuff that you need and you don't have any more stuff to add that you necessarily need at the time, you run into the issue of bricking, and I guess having this up can unbrick your hand, because when you banish something that you don't need, or when you add something that you don't need, then you can just banish you can banish it. I don't know, it just, you lose so many resources just to draw a card. I just don't think it's worth playing at all. You just don't play this card. That's the lineup though. Like I said, there's still a red card. We could be getting a red monster on a red canvas. No idea what those do, but yeah, let's just talk about what this deck can do now. So obviously it's a column-based deck that introduced the idea of adjacent card zones and really allows the pilot of this archetype to utilize columns and adjacent zones to their advantage, because like I said before, this deck is not really on anyone's radar, and playing against it for the first time can be annoying because of all the column knowledge you have to have and adjacent columns. You have to read the giant text that all these have, and we all know that Yu-Gi-Oh players don't really like to read that much, and that can be used as an advantage. With that in mind, though, I cannot stress enough that card placement matters in this deck. You really need to be able to establish your zones, figure out where you want the cards to be so that you can utilize their effects properly. What you're really trying to do here is play that so that you have something in the column or adjacent column at all times to tag out its cost, so that you don't lose your monsters. You can continue to play the game once your stuff comes back in standby phase. An opening play ideally includes a Snowy and either a Snow or another monster to activate in Snowy's column or adjacent zone, ideally Snow, so that you can set up a Thundery Trap or whatever you don't have already in hand. An ideal opening for your first turn hand would probably include cards like a Snow, a Snowy Canvas, and a Hand Trap, a Trap, or a Draw card to extend you into said cards, the Hand Trap or the Traps. Ideally Anti-Spell Fragrance for your Trap, because that card is nuts in this deck. Being able to stop your opponent from doing stuff and then use Thundery to send that to get what you need is nuts. And then by turn 4, with semi-ideal opening, you should have all of your traps set, 3 to 4 monsters on board, if not 1 monster and your Rainbow Link set up. The deck has some cool stun ability, and I think that's what the strongest part of the deck is the fact that they can tag out and stun your opponent until they run out of resources. Some of the strengths of the deck can easily play around targeting and board wipes with the correct placement of your cards. It just takes the knowledge of how to utilize those cards. I think something to set up is making sure that your Snowy is in the very middle spell and trap zone, and then next to it is your defensive cards like the Thundery Canvas or the Cloudy or the Rainy. Honestly, I think the Rainy is a little more important to have next to the Snowy, because the card that is summoned above the Snowy, if you have Rainy and Thundery next to the Snowy, that monster now has all 3 of those effects, and that is very strong to be doing. So your middle zone is probably your strongest zone to be trying to summon to. The fact that it has the ability to search every turn with the Snowy Canvas is nuts, because it's good for deck thinning, so you can get to your defensive cards and extenders a lot easier. Now, some of the problems with the deck, that's really normal summon reliant, and it can clog weather cards in your hand really easily once you search your stuff out with Snowy on each turn. Once you search all the stuff, you don't really have much you don't really have much you can do once you have like 2 Thunders, 2 Snow, and a couple of the spell and traps in your hand. You can't really do much with those in your hand. I guess you can I really don't know. I haven't found out a way to unclog the hands other than using like double summon, things like that. Or if you're playing the Masterpiece engine, the True Draco engine, you can just pop the cards in your hand and search with Diagram. But it just clogs a lot, so that can be a problem. But by the time you clog, you should have a pretty established board, and if they do get rid of anything, you're going to have resources in your hand to keep playing, because the name of this deck is to try to out-resource your opponent. You just get all of your resources on board, stun, 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 and hopefully they don't have any comeback. Which, I mean, every deck is hoping that every deck doesn't have comeback. But some cards to potentially include in the deck, like I said, are double summon, because it's a very normal summon reliant deck and you're trying to get your monsters on board as quickly as possible. Another card to talk about is Drowning Mirror Force. If you didn't know what I was talking about before, now you do, because in Pure, this card's nuts. Being able to tag out all of your monsters, and then your opponent sees an open board, they attack into everything because you already have your trap and potentially 1 or 2 spells face up in one card set, which is the Drowning Mirror Force. And when they go in, you're really playing on your opponent's ignorance there, because not a lot of people are playing around Mirror Forces anymore. True Draco are playing Mirror Forces, so I guess it's becoming a little more prevalent, but Drowning Mirror Force is nuts in this deck, because once you get your Drowning Mirror Force off in standby phase, you're going to get all your stuff back. And we already talked about Anti-Spell Fragrance. It's just a really good deck that a really good deck. It's a really good card that Thunder can really utilize, and it's also a great floodgate to include. Another card I think is very relevant to play is Hecatrice and the Valhalla combo, because if you open a Hecatrice and a Thunder, you can send the Hecatrice, add the Valhalla, activate the Valhalla, summon your Thunder effect, pop the Valhalla to activate Snowy from the deck, then activate Thunder via Snowy to add a Snow, normal summon the Snow, and then activate the trap. And then you have 2 monsters for next turn for your opponent to deal with. You can tag them both out and add a card, and if you drew the Mirror Force, you already have had that set, and it's a very good combo. I think that's very relevant to be running in the Pure versions. Something else to run in the Pure version would be Scapegoat. Scapegoat is a solid choice in anything that doesn't have a board presence turn 1, and this deck doesn't necessarily have a board presence. Even the combo I just talked about ends you with 0 monsters on board turn 1. So once you have your 2 monsters on board, you're going to have to sacrifice 1, because Scapegoat needs the 4 zones. So you just leave whatever one you need on the board, use your Scapegoat on end phase. Well, I guess you can't use it on end phase, and I guess in that situation it's not the best to be talking about, but something to consider is Scapegoat, because it summons you Saryuja, and Saryuja is amazing in this deck because it can not only draw you into another painter, but it can potentially draw you into other extenders or defensive cards. If you draw a painter, you can obviously special with Saryuja and continue to go off from there. But the problem with Scapegoat is the one that I just brought up, is that you are summoning on both their turns. You're summoning on your opponent's turn and on your turn, so Scapegoat can sometimes be shut off. It's something to consider though, because it summons you Saryuja and it can really extend your plays, but it can clog things up a bit. With that in mind, getting outside of the Pure versions, let's talk about Wind Witches. We're obviously trying to summon Crystal Wing with this engine, and that allows for negation of hand traps and dealing with other monsters that the Painter engine cannot. It just gives you another aspect of stun ability. It lowers your opponent's ceiling, enough for the Painters to be able to potentially do more what they are meant to do uninterrupted. And that's pretty good. It's a free special summon, and it baits out Ash. But if they do Ash the Wind Witch and you don't have any other follow-up plays, that can kind of suck. But that's neither here nor there. That's just Ash. The True Draco engine is also something to consider, because it's just another ceiling lowerer. It lowers your opponent's ceiling. This engine can utilize the canvases as tribute fodder as well, while attempting to establish a Cloudy in order to get those tribute spells and traps back when they are tributed for one of the True Draco monsters, because as we know, Cloud gets your weather spell and traps back from the grave when a weather card leaves. So with that in mind, the True Draco engine is pretty cool, but I'm not quite sure which is the better version. I would like to think the best option is probably Pure or the Wind Witch engine. I would say those are a little better, because the True Draco engine has a lot of engine cards you need to play, And the Weather Painter engine also has a lot of engine cards you need to play. And the ratios conflict, and I just don't think it's the most effective way to pilot the deck. You're just playing a worse version of True Draco in that case, and I just don't think it needs it. The Wind Witch engine is small, can easily fit in if you just take out some of the traps and extenders of the pure version. And the pure version is just really good because it plays so many 2 and 3 ofs that you can just roll through with your desires, get the stuff you need, and start setting up your board so that you can win by like turn 4. But with all that taken into consideration, I hope this helped, and hope y'all enjoyed the tutorial on how to Weather Painter. Hopefully I didn't leave anything out. I've been working on this one for quite a while now. Sorry about the length. I tried not to make it too long, but this deck has a lot of stuff that it can do. Hope it helped. Hope y'all enjoyed it, like I said. And thanks for watching. And this is Alex from Plus 3 TCG. Signing out, y'all.